Welcome to Registered, the podcast of the Catholic Register, where we'll be taking a look at the stories that graced all of our platforms over the past week. I'm Mickey Conlon, editor of the Register, alongside associate editor Quinton Amundson and reporter Luke Mandato. This week's episode is brought to you by the Catholic Children's Aid Foundation, which supports children, youth, and families served by Ontario's child welfare system through the Catholic Children's Aid Society of Toronto. From emergency essentials like food and safe housing to long-term programs that build stability and hope, your support makes it possible. Visit ccafdn.ca and help change a child's story. Well, welcome back after our brief Easter hiatus. We took 1 week off, and we hope you all had a blessed Easter. Now, I wonder what Easter was like in China, as this year officially marks 80 years since the Catholic Church was established in China. Yet we must ask the question, after these 8 decades, where does the Church stand in China, in particular, Communist China? China, of course, has been under the Communist banner since 1949. And I don't have to tell any of you people out there what communism's view of religion is. Yet the Vatican does have its agreement with the Chinese that allows it to operate in the nation, but it's quite complex, with perhaps too much power remaining in the hands of the Chinese government rather than the Holy See when it comes to church matters. Quinton, you spoke with someone who is critical of the Vatican for keeping up with this agreement, and one who had some pretty harsh words for Pope Leo the 14th. Why don't you tell us about that conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Mickey. Nina Shea is a woman who is a religious freedom advocate, an international human rights lawyer, and she served on the U.S.'s International Commission of Religious Freedom under three presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. And she has really done a lot of studies looking at the plight of persecuted clergy and, of course, lay Catholics and Christians all throughout the Chinese mainland. And she is, very concerned that there is not enough of a difference right now between Pope Leo the 14th strategy and Pope Francis's, of course, consummated in that Sino-Vatican deal signed in 2018, overseen by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State. So there's a few points of criticism, but a specific case study she wanted to bring up during our conversation was the case of Jimmy Lai, the democracy advocate, who was arrested under China's national security law, which has really been denounced by the international community as a let's arrest our political opponents law. And he's been in jail for a few years. And Nina Shea took note of Pope Leo refusing to comment on Jimmy's case early in March. And it just really baffled her. It's like, well, why? The Pope has done very well in his first 11 months in using his platform to, make statements of moral leadership on a host of geopolitical topics. And there's been a lot of silence in terms of China, at least today. So she's just wondering, why could that be? Why are there not prayers or audiences where Pope Leo is speaking about this issue? So it's perplexing her very much, and she hopes that that changes. And I think she just would like to see silence regarding China on a lot of fronts to change, and for there to be a lot more vocal criticisms about what's taking place in the country.
Well, I wonder, can we really, this criticism of the Holy See and Pope Leo, is it valid? After all, we know the diplomatic world and the Vatican is part of that diplomatic world. So its diplomatic corps is known for its quiet diplomacy and has been carrying on behind the scene talks, well, forever.
Is it effective diplomacy? That's what we have to really ask ourselves here.
Well,
We have
is
to.
anything effective diplomacy? Look at the war we've got going on in the Mideast right now after all that diplomacy. But yeah, go on.
Well, very true. But I guess the one thing we have to ask ourselves is that the Vatican deal is first signed in 2018, and we have already seen so many contraventions of the agreement where the Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association has unilaterally made, bishop appointments, probably most brazenly during the 2 week period where Pope Francis had passed away and where Pope Leo emerged from the conclave. There were appointments made during that time. So there have been contraventions, but there haven't been really any discernible gains where it seems like there's a lot of noticeable Catholic inroads on the surface. Right now, it seems like the sinicization campaign for China, which is really taking religion and putting it all in the image of Xi Jinping and the Chinese ideology, that's going ahead full flight, where it doesn't seem like the Catholic gains are very noticeable right now. So, in terms of the aims of the agreement being achieved, signed in 2018, very tough to find any victories, but very easy to find a lot of setbacks right now. But Pope Leo said that he would take some time early in his tenure to really allow the people that have been overseeing the agreements take ownership of this file for now. So maybe we will see some changes once we start to see Pope Leo kind of assert himself a little bit more here. So maybe it's a little bit too early to tell on Pope Leo's approach to China, but I think we could perhaps be at least a little bit disappointed that there haven't been more gains of the China Vatican deal. But we'll see. There's time will tell.
Well, that's diplomacy. It's always we're going to see, and as Canadians, we're no strangers to having diplomatic relations with the Chinese and kind of dealing with some Chinese hostility. It's only a few short years ago that the Chinese regime imprisoned two of our citizens. Everyone knows Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. That was in retaliation for Canada's detention of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou at the request of the United States. It took almost 3 years for them to be released, and that was only after Meng's release from house arrest. Now Nina Shea, she's got a bit of a solution for the church in facing up to that hostility, maybe becoming an underground church. That's an interesting concept because most of us know the story about Eastern Europe under Soviet communism and how many churches, from Lithuania, Poland, the Czech Republic, well, Czechoslovakia at the time, all those places, they had an underground church. In fact, they only grew in strength, and especially during the papacy of the great Polish Pope John Paul II, who, of course, many say he's the man who basically brought down European communism. So I guess the question to ask is an underground church realistic in China?
That is a very, difficult question to answer, Mickey. I'd have to say that, certainly we are seeing in terms of the church that's aligned with the state, they are cracking down on any, unapproved worship or any activity that doesn't really align with the church that is very walking in lockstep with the state right now. There were some statements released by the Chinese, Catholic bishops earlier this year warning against any unapproved or unsolicited activities. So there definitely is a little bit of a surveillance and, risk in terms of, being caught. But I guess if you want to, really promote a faith that, really has the Christian ideals that you and I and Luke share, I would say perhaps the underground route may be the only way to possibly, do that if you want to ensure that way, given that a lot of the official church is being rewritten to align with Chinese ideology. But it's very difficult. I'm not too sure if it is realistic logistically, given the authoritarian nature of the state. But there are so many Christians and Catholics there. 44 million at last estimate. I mean, there is great potential for Christianity to bloom, and I think the thoughts and prayers need to be determined if underground maybe is the way to go. Luke, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, just the thoughts on the logistics of it are what interests me when we look at what you touched upon there, Mickey, about John Paul II's role in fighting communism through underground churches and the role of underground churches before. I'm not sure if we could ever have that function the way it did in the early 80s, I guess the late 70s and 80s, that we could today, what that would even look like with all of the technology. And Quinton, you talked about surveillance that goes on, especially throughout China. Um, what that would look like in keeping it separate from the public eye. I'm not sure there is really a separation in China from the public eye to what people are doing, even within their own homes. I'm not sure to what extent, but I just know with the way the world is today, I'm not sure it could even operate. What would an underground church look like today? Anywhere, but let alone China, right? So that the logistic side of it is interesting. And the other word you touched on, Quentin, is security and what danger Catholics and Christians might face if something like this were to be undertaken. That's something we have to think about as well, because I'm sure when you move something like this to the underground side of things, it's not a slap on the wrist if it gets found out, right? So it's definitely, like you said, maybe it is the only option, but we'd have to have a whole other discussion about what that might look like. Mickey, do you have any thoughts on what that could
Well,
look like
I,
or what
I
that would
always
lead?
look back, for my ancestors, of course, from my Irish ancestry, because it's not exactly something new, in modern ages, right? The Catholic Church was held down in Ireland, and I remember being over and visiting. And we were in Donegal, and my aunt, sorry, my cousin, telling me some of the stories about the area where her place was, and he's well, over here is where they used to hold these underground masses. It was at the bottom of the hill because up at the top of the hill there was a lookout who was watching for the authorities and things. So it's not something new, and I'm sure 100 years from now, maybe in another country, somewhere else, someone will be having this exact same discussion. So we'll see. Uh, I know definitely in 100 years, there's something else that another pressing issue now that people will likely still be talking about, and both of you have written fairly extensively in recent weeks about, and that's the rise of artificial intelligence in almost every aspect of life. At home on this topic, Luke, this week you spoke with the organizers of the Ontario Association of Parents in Catholic Education, OAPSE, about their conference that is hoping to educate parents about AI and its role in the education system. What did you hear?
Yes, thanks, Mickey. And as you said, AI is kind of finding its way into everything. And I guess the latest thing that it's found itself into is that annual conference put on by OAPSE, where they bring together all the parents from different Catholic school boards across Ontario, really for an informative session. Also, sort of an evening for them just to get together and speak together and sort of have their voice be heard in a more general way. But this year's theme, as you touched on there, Mickey, is being a genuine shepherd in an AI world. And this theme comes directly from the co-executives Joe Perry and Annalisa Crudo Perry's direct experiences with parents who have been coming to them on the topic of AI, many of whom really disconnected from it, unsure of what it means, how it operates, how it's affecting their children, how their children are using it, and even its role in classrooms. Maybe they hear about it through their children or through teachers about its role in classrooms, which is something we talked about pretty extensively. So they're setting out to throw this annual conference with that theme, finding out what does AI mean for our kids' education and also for the extension of that into family life. So it was a very interesting chat. They have a few speakers lined up with expertise on AI and especially AI in classrooms. One of them being Giancarlo Brodo. He's the founder and CEO of Pave Education. He has a very strong academic background. really since the dawn of AI, and even before that, with the role of technology in classrooms, and I guess it's sort of naturally extended into AI's role in recent years. I had a chat with him as well, and I would say his biggest message is he doesn't want parents to be fearful or even really passive on AI. I would say he definitely had a very pro AI approach when we spoke. Um, Mainly, I think, because he said it's unavoidable. And that's something, again, Mickey, you said before we started having this chat. When you're fearful of something that isn't going anywhere, that's when it can really lead to problems and misinformation and being unaware of what's going on. But the better grasp that parents have on artificial intelligence, I think the better grasp the children will, the better grasp teachers will, and I think it goes to show that it's not going anywhere. So it's probably best if we start to understand it more and more.
Yet we've got so many parents and, well, just so many people in general who have, well, they've basically got a hear no evil, see no evil mentality. But we all know it's already out there. We're all using it, whether we know it or whether we like it or not. But it's people, as I said, it's hear no evil, see no evil. Uh, Quinton, I know you've done, in fact, it's a bit of a pet project, this whole AI thing with you. You've written extensive, like much more extensively than any of us have on it. So, some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Mickey. I mean, I was taking notice of a story that our friends at the BC Catholic did, recently. They're starting to delve into this territory, and they were speaking to the creator of, Magisterium AI, Matthew Harvey Sanders, and he's echoed what you guys have been saying, that it is not a wave, it is a tsunami, and we have to not really allow ourselves to be paralyzed by fear here. That's the absolute worst thing that we could do. And I think that one of the good aims of the conference is to really instruct these parents on the values that they need to teach in terms of AI. Like, there needs to be a really strong ethical foundation. And we're going to have to see if teachers are going to be able to adapt in terms of, okay, I can't stop the current, how can I use this AI, effectively in terms of assignments? So we've already been hearing universities, and perhaps we'll see this at a grade school level. It's, well, your assignment is what are the qualities of the prompt that you give, Chat GPT? Like, what's the product that you, create out of that? Is that maybe a way that you are able to kind of lean in, but are also encouraging the kids to use their critical thinking to come up with the most dynamic AI, information. That's a question that's a little above any of our, pay grades to really figure out how the teachers are going to do that. I've been talking to, my sister and my brother-in-law who are in the education field, a little bit about how they're going to do it, and I mean, they're definitely, going to be grappling with this in the months ahead, and I'll be very keen to, learn and, gain knowledge about them, about how this is really manifesting in the classroom going forward. It's going to be very fascinating, and between Luke and myself, we're going to be covering every development as it comes along.
Well, it's definitely something we can't ignore.
Absolutely. And if we're going to be covering it, Quinton, I think we'll be quite busy in these coming weeks, months, and years, because it just never stops. It's unbelievable. And you touched on advocating for better safeguards as well. This idea of making sure that parents understand what their children have access to. I was going to say, when I was in school, it was sort of just the rise of social media. The internet was already in full swing, but I think even back then we didn't really have a full understanding of what we could access and what was online. I can't even imagine what children these days are thinking with AI, where not only is there not a finite, amount to discover that you can stumble upon, anything can be created. You can read, see, hear, even have video generation of anything imaginable. So a major point of contention from Brodo was advocating for better safeguards for AI as well, and making sure that both children and parents understand some of the harms associated, but not being too caught up in those harms to understand it and how to use it properly.
Well, kind of as a final note, like with the social media and the rise of that, eventually it just, so many of the social scientists have come out and said that it's really created an anxious generation. I mean, now hopefully we learn with that problem, we don't create just even more anxiety on an entirely different front with AI. We need to be very sure about what AI is and what AI isn't, and AI is not human. So we cannot treat it like human. It is not your counselor. It is not your friend. It's not your parents. It's not your intimate partner. And we got to be very clear on that, especially with an impressionable youth. That's all.
Okay. Well, if there's, you're right about let's not be too anxious about it, but unfortunately, there's a lot of anxiety over something else. And that, of course, is staring us right in the face every day. And it's the rising costs at the grocery stores. As I've said on this show more than a few occasions, here's us, gainfully employed, yet we're picky shoppers, because the prices are just skyrocketing. Now there are reports that are soon to be released showing the dilemma facing food banks of all people across the country and the effects on them of the rising costs. Quinton, you spoke with some of the authors of these reports. What are the food banks telling you about the rising cost of food and how it's affecting them in trying to help people who are food insecure?
Yeah, thanks, Mickey. So Richard Mattern from Food Banks Canada, he is the author of the Who's Hungry report, and it's every March that they collect their snapshots. So they had their research team in the field talking to over 5,600, different food banks across the country, and I mean, it is very dire where all of a sudden you are hearing food banks like noticeably one in Moose Jaw, a couple other in Calgary. It's like, okay, well, we have to cut down to like really a once a month operation instead of a twice a month. We have to give less food out because our supply levels are greatly compromised, and they're going to have to, rack up even more costs to try and get in more food because they are running low on these supplies, and they all of a sudden have to really consider it's like, well, I mean, are there going to have to be rules in place in terms of how do we assess and vet who are really the most in need and who are the some people that whose need are not so grave? But I mean, that's a very difficult thing because the people that are lining up for a food bank now are unimaginable, the type of people that would have lined up. I mean, fully employed people, like you said, gainfully employed are having to line up because they're going to have to make these difficult decisions. I mean, do I get gas in my vehicle? I mean, especially now, the past few weeks with these gas prices, or do I, have that extra meal for my family? So I mean, it's very difficult. And the Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto, they also released their annual report, and all I could say is the guy there, Neil Hetherington, keeps saying it took 38 years for there to be 1 million annual visitors. Now, in 5 short years later, it's 4 million. And in 2027, they expect 5 million people to line up that calendar year alone. So the stats are not going to be any rosier in 2026 when these reports come out compared to 2025. It is only going to look worse.
And there's the elephant in the room. Of course, we've alluded to the rising gas prices, and that's due to the U.S. and Israel's war on Iran. So that's not even factored into these reports, I'm sure. And what have we seen in the short period since the war started? Where gas prices have gone up, 60 cents a liter, sort of thing. So, and every time that food's got to get somewhere somehow, and that's fuel. Some truck has got to drive it somewhere. So inevitably, that's going to make this even worse. So, what are you guys kind of seeing for the future?
Yeah, it's tough to see, and we used to joke that you couldn't leave the house without spending $100, and that was about entertainment. Now you can't leave the house without spending $100 to get where you want to go, or if you're going to the store to buy food, forget it. So I think Quinton hit the nail on the head. It's such a tough question when you start looking into who needs what more than who, right? So it can be hard to differentiate between, you know, who has a looking for a handout and who's looking for a hand up sort of thing. But I think everyone's feeling the hurt. And, you know, I had done an article probably about a year ago on a food bank close to me. It was a soup kitchen, actually. And like Quinton said, you see the people coming in and you can't believe the demographics of who you're seeing. People who I'm trying to second guess if they were in one of my high school classes lining up for a hot meal. You know, families with multiple children lining up for a hot meal. Not what you would ever expect. I think I even say in the article it was the complete opposite of the demographic you might expect to see there. And that's going to continue. And I think the question we have to ask is if Quinton mentions that next year is going to look worse and the year after even worse than that, what is the tipping point? When is the breaking point where it evens out? And to me, Mickey, I don't see that breaking point anywhere soon.
Well, and let's look at just going beyond that. You know, people that can afford the food. Well, a lot of them went out to restaurants. They enjoyed, you know, and going out and having a good time. Well, can you now go out to a restaurant that, for all the same reasons, has had to raise its prices? So it's not it's affecting 100% of the population, and it's going to keep doing that, unfortunately. So. Okay, on that note, then, I think we're going to wrap up this week's edition of Registered, and I'd like to thank you guys for joining me today. I'd like to thank all of you out there listening and hope you can join us again next week. And of course, a big thanks to this week's sponsor, the Catholic Children's Aid Foundation, which is supporting children, youth, and families served by Ontario's child welfare system through the Catholic Children's Aid Society of Toronto. Visit ccafdn.ca and help change a child's story. And to keep up on all the stories and what's happening in the Catholic world, remember to keep going to our website at catholicregister.org for all your breaking news in the Catholic world. Thanks very much for listening.